Okay, wow. Once again, I'd like to thank the same people, the Academy, MGM, our producer, Alan Marshall. I would like to thank my friend and lyricist, Dean Pitchford, for an inspired lyric, Irene Cara for a magnificent vocal performance, and once again, Alan Parker for making this award possible.
MGM's had a history of bringing musicals to the screen, and so I'm very grateful to be part of such an exciting musical that kind of feels like the 80s. I'd like to thank Alan Parker, Irene Cara for singing the song, Christopher Gore for giving us the screenplay that provided the framework, Michael for writing with me and for giving me that melody, and the members of the Academy. Thank you very much.
Was your heart in your throat at that point?
I was numb. No, I was absolutely numb. It was a very interesting and surreal experience because it's got, there are two beats to it. The first was being in the theater where I had always seen that on TV, but I'd never been in that space. And so everything about it was otherworldly. And then when our names were called, I sort of went onto hyperdrive, autopilot. Yeah. And I got up there. Thank God I had thought through my remarks beforehand, because otherwise I would. And so that was the first beat. Numb. And then we went backstage. We did the interview line. We did the photos. Then we went back out into the audience. Then we popped into a couple of the parties. And then we ended up calling a couple friends of ours and converging on a restaurant on Sunset Boulevard and meeting them there to celebrate until they closed the restaurant. Because remember, we were going into the Academy Awards at 5 o'clock. They began for us at 5 o'clock. So we were out on the streets at 8 o'clock. So we had a whole evening ahead of us. So we kind of like filled up the evening until the restaurant threw us out. And then I ended up getting home about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I had taped the awards on my VHS machine. And so while I'm getting out of my tuxedo, I rewound to about the point where they are going to announce us. And I sat there and I was looking at the TV and I realized that is how I always saw the Oscars, on that box. That was real. What I had just lived through was not real. And they got to the moment where they start announcing the nominations, and my heart starts to pound and pound and pound. Like, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. They announce our names, and I, in my underwear, go screaming and jumping around my bedroom in the middle of the night in the middle of Los Angeles. And that was when it hit me that, because it was real. It happened on television.
Did you think you had a shot before the awards? Did you think you had a good chance?
No, because for two reasons. One, the common idea is that movies that open early in the year prior are forgotten by the time we get to the Oscars. That's number one. Yep. And number two, 9 to 5, we had opened in May. 9 to 5 opened like Thanksgiving, Christmas. Ooh. And 9 to 5, the song had gone to number 1. And it was all over the airwaves at the time that nominations were being made and the Academy members were voting. And on top of that, you might see in that clip that we were seated, when we arrived at the Oscars, we were seated in the middle of a long row, and on the aisle was seated Dolly Parton.
I thought I saw her. I was going to ask you. I don't want to be embarrassed to be wrong. I was like, yeah, that's Dolly Parton.
Dolly Parton we were nominated against her for 9 to 5, and she was at the end of the aisle in which we were seated. And again, I've always had this kind of theory that they know who the winners are in advance, and they
Right.
seat them on the aisle so they could just stand up and walk to the stage. But
Yeah.
as you can see, we were in the middle, and we had to go, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, and get all the way to the end. And then Dolly Parton stood up and threw her arms wide, and she said, "I'm not going to let you pass. I'm not going to let you pass." She was being very sweet and funny about
Yes,
it.
very kind. Yeah.
And we both hugged her and kissed her, and she sent us on our way. But when we got to the awards show and I saw Dolly Parton on the end and us in the middle, I thought, well, there's no chance, because we know that they put the winners on the aisles.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, I had no idea. And on top of that, a second song from Fame was nominated. Michael Gore had written with his sister, Leslie Gore,
Yeah.
Out Here on My Own. And so there was constant speculation in the press about whether the songs from Footloose would cancel each other out. So it was a combination of the movie had opened 9 months before. Dolly Parton was on the top of the charts with a movie that opened in February, and there were two songs from Fame that might cancel each other out. So I was blown away when it happened.
Oh, wow. And not to mention, I mean, Angie Dickinson and Luciano Pavarotti,
Yes.
are the two. That's unbelievable. That's
Yes.
amazing. Let me ask you this: where do you, if you don't mind me asking, where do you keep your Academy Award? Is it in your house?
It's actually at my house. I'm at my house in Santa Barbara right now. It's at my house in Los Angeles,
Gotcha.
and it's upstairs in my assistant's office on a shelf in the back corner, where it can't be seen from the doorway.
Wow. I heard that there's a contract. I don't know if this is myth or truth, but I heard that you can never sell it, and if you're to sell it, you have to offer it back to them for $1.
Yeah, you're supposed to offer it back to them for $1.
Yeah.
I know some people have circumvented that, and their estates have consigned them to auction houses. And I don't know that the Academy runs them down anymore. With every passing year, there are 30 more winners or 32
Right.
or more winners. So there's a lot of Oscars out there.
Yeah, you and Michael seem like you have a wonderful rapport. Like, just from that clip alone, like it's like what a perfect team you guys were.
Well, also imagine that this was my first movie, his first movie song.
Wow.
I mean, it was, and you can see how I was 29, I think. He was 30 or 31. We discovered when he called me and we started to get to know each other, we discovered that we had been at Yale together, but he was 1 year ahead of me. And we had never met because he was in the music school and I was on another part of the campus. I was doing a lot of theater. So we were sort of like peers with so much in common from the moment that we connected.
Yeah, that's amazing. Obviously you've been nominated 4 other times. Is that accurate?
4 times total.
Wow. And then 8 Grammys, 2 Tonys. Do I have that right?
8 Grammy nominations, 2 Tony nominations. Yeah.
And a part of $70 million worth of records sold.
70 million copies.
Copies sold. You're right. Yeah. I mean, how insane is that resume so far? I mean,
and to be honest, I think I came up with that, or sort of zeroed in on that 70 million about a decade ago. And yet
it could be a lot more at this point.
There are things like the Footloose soundtrack and the greatest hits, Whitney Houston's greatest hits, that continue to add numbers to that.
And this past June, you were inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Am I correct with that?
Yes, that's correct.
Boy, what an event that was. You have Kevin Bacon there with you. You have the picture here that I have on my screen. Talk a little bit about that. That's got to be an honor and a half for you. Wow.
Well, it was, what's all the more amazing is that I had basically retired. I retired about 3 years ago because my husband has been having health problems, and I realized that I could not keep up the pace where I was flying to New York and I was going here and there and writing and recording. And also it was time.
Yeah.
It was time. I had done everything that I wanted to do at least twice and had the most wonderful experiences. And so because of that, I had been nominated. This was the 4th nomination for the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And so going back maybe 7 years, 8 years ago was my first nomination. And then every other year or something over time. And with every passing year, I felt, who remembers me anymore? You know, I felt like I was sort of like slowly, like the sun slowly setting in the west. And so 3 previous times I had been nominated, but not inducted, not been voted on. And so this was a complete out of the blue that they called and they said, you've been voted into the Academy, into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And it was very moving, a kind of valediction for me. It was like, bye-bye, the end of my career. It was a lovely way to wrap things up. And they basically, what they do is they build a sequence for each of the nominated, each of the inductees, and they build a sequence in which either those people perform or they get people who've recorded their songs. Like a country singer, a country writer named Hillary Lindsey was there because she had written for Carrie Underwood, who sang with her. She had written for Keith Urban, who came on stage and sang and played with her. And so they had reached out. I didn't know this, but they had reached out to Denise Williams to come on and sing Let's Hear It for the Boy. Yeah. And they had reached out to Kevin Bacon and his brother, Michael Bacon, who tour and perform as their own band called the Bacon Brothers. And they brought them in. And of course, the Bacon Brothers perform Footloose. And so it was a wonderful, because it was such a music themed evening. And then all of a sudden, here comes Kevin Bacon, bringing a whiff of Hollywood to the stage, and singing and dancing and singing and dancing. He danced like a drunken sailor. He was awesome. He was just awesome. And he got the audience up on their feet. It was a very exciting evening.
I saw clips of it on his Instagram. I want to come back to Kevin because Kevin seems like he really thinks the world of you, but I'm going to come back to him in a second. For those listening or watching, whatever the medium they're using this, I just want to read a couple of your amazing, some of your work here. Make Me Lose Control, Eric, fantastic. After All, Peter Cetera, Cher, Almost Paradise, Don't Fight It, Kenny Loggins. I mean, this is
Almost Paradise. Anne Reno and Mike Sweeney.
Yes.
Reno.
Sorry. Almost Paradise, Mike Reno, Ann Wilson, Don't Fight It, Loggins, and Steve Perry. Let me ask you, there's more here. I'm going to work my way down here. How much communication do you have with like a Cher, or do you have with like a Steve Perry? Or I know you're relatively close to, or you work to Kenny Loggins. How much communication is involved there, Dean?
In the writing process, you know what? I had a blissful experience with Michael Gore at the beginning of my career because we lived near each other in New York and we were working on this Fame project. Right. And so I kind of sank into that world, and he and I were thick as thieves for about 8 weeks while we turned out our songs. Yeah. It didn't quite prepare me for the kind of piecemeal work that I would eventually do, where I'd get a request to do a song for this person or write with this guy, or go to Nashville and write with these 3 people. And so there was a lot of communication in the moment, a lot of intense interaction when the collaboration was going on. But then, we didn't summer together in the Hamptons. We sort of went and also a lot of people I worked with, Sammy Hagar, Eric Carmen, Kenny Loggins, they all had their performing careers. So they went off and they were traveling around the world. Peter Allen had his performing career while he was still alive. And so some of the great joy of my writing experience was I had this wonderful mix of performers and dyed-in-the-wool songwriters like Tom Snow.
Right. And I want to finish this list. Fame, Irene Cara, you mentioned. Footloose, Kenny Loggins, Holding Out for a Hero, Bonnie Tyler, Let's Hear It for the Boy. Do you feel like your writing was appreciated by in a general sense? Because you really, these songs, we're not talking about like obscure songs on some rant. And I left out a lot. Just for those listening, I left out a lot. So like, do you feel your writing was appreciated?
You know, well, I'll tell you, going up the charts was a validation.
Yeah.
You know, getting songs get to number one, going gold, going platinum, that was very validating. What I very quickly learned was not to believe my press.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like I said, I think Fame was the third or fourth song I had recorded. And so it the I guess I could have gone, well, put the Oscar on the shelf and kick back. Instead, I just doubled down and I wrote with everybody and anybody 7 days a week, all over the country and in London. And I did not pause for a minute because I didn't have any guarantee that there would be a next and a next and a next. And I
Right.
needed to add to the catalog, as you know, while I was being asked to the ball. I was going to dance with as many people as possible while I was at the ball.
Personal question here. What is your husband's favorite work of yours as far as songs go?
Well, I think it might be. There's a little quick story behind that.
I want to hear it.
When I met Michael, he was on a swim team in West Hollywood,
Gotcha.
and we began to date, and then it's been 34 years we've been
Wow.
together.
Congratulations. That's
Thank
great.
you. And about a year, maybe a year after we had gotten together, and I'd met all of his teammates, Whitney Houston had a number one song internationally with something Michael Gore and I wrote for her called "All the Man That I Need."
Right.
And when it went to number one, the guys on Michael's swim team were ribbing him and saying, "You've only been going out with Dean for so long, and already Whitney Houston's got a number one song, and she's singing about Michael, all the man that I need." And he would, and then I would, when in their company, I would try to correct them and say, no, it wasn't. I wrote this before I knew Michael, and it's been a long time coming. And finally, we just gave up on trying to convince them that it was not written for Michael. So years go by. I mean, even to the point that in our wedding rings is engraved ATMTIN, all the man that I need.
Oh, very sweet. Yeah.
But then years go by, and suddenly one day it hits me. I haven't written Michael a song. We've made a big deal of the fact that that was not a song for him. I owe my husband a song. So I sat down and I wrote a lyric called "If I Never Met You." And I sent it to my collaborator, Tom Snow. And he immediately, I faxed it to him. He immediately called me. He said, "This is amazing." He said, "Thank you for this lyric. I got to get on this right away." And he wrote a gorgeous melody to it. And we got together in his studio, and he played, and I sang the demo of the song so that I could give it as a gift to Michael. And when we were done with the demo of the song, we looked at each other and said, this is not radio. This is not going to go to radio. Nobody is recording these kind of songs anymore. It was a great exercise for us. So a year goes by. I get a call from my pal, Jay Landers, who's worked with all the greats in the business. And he says, I'm working with Barbra Streisand on an album of love songs, because before she gets married to Jim Brolin, she wants to release an album of pure love songs. And she flipped for "If I Never Met You." Barbara is going to cut the song. So I was able to tell my husband that Barbra Streisand is singing his song.
Oh my Lord. Oh my God. Is that great? Because I know you wrote for her. I did not know the backstory for that.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I totally thought when you were about to tell that story that you were going to say "Holding Out for a Hero," which was like so Hollywood, that song is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's awesome. Let me ask you this, Dean. Have you ever written a song that you haven't been given credit for?
No. I did write something for a television show early in my career, and I did not. The deal was not made with all parties being on the up and up. Let's just put it that way.
Mm.
My name is on the song, but my portion of the song was not. And I learned something very valuable because I was moving very, very, very fast at the time, and I was sort of trusting everybody that I was dealing with and not thinking that somebody might pull a fast one on me. And somebody pulled a fast one on me, and I learned, and I never did it again.
Yeah, smart. I have to say, we've been talking about your songwriting abilities. The fact that you wrote a screenplay for Footloose, you wrote the screenplay for Footloose, and then you have these, how many hit songs? 5 on that soundtrack? 4? I mean, it's just one after the
There were
other.
six top 40 songs.
Oh my God. Like, Dean, I will go the rest of my podcast career never interviewing somebody that wrote a phenomenal screenplay for the ultimate 80s movie. Like, there's not a person that grew up in the 80s that will not say Footloose is not in their top 5.
Thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
Yeah. And you wrote the screenplay, and you had an enormous part of the soundtrack, a double dose of awesomeness that I don't think I'll ever see again. Talk about the screenplay part of that, Dean. Was that difficult? I know you did research. You really poured your heart into the screenplay, if what I'm reading is correct.
I will give I have to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
My old dear friend Craig Zaden, who is sadly no longer with us. Craig Zaden and I had met in New York. He had directed me in the club act that I sang in New York that brought me to the attention of Rupert Holmes. Craig came out to Los Angeles and became a movie executive. I followed shortly thereafter because Fame was happening. But I lived in New York. Michael lived in New York when Michael Gore lived in New York when we wrote Fame. And so I really had not been to Los Angeles. So I followed along behind it. And then we win the Academy Award the next February, March, or whatever it was. And Craig Zaden said to me, you have a choice now. He said, you have got cred up the wazoo for having won the Academy Award with Fame. What you can do is you can go home now and sit by the phone and wait for the phone to ring with somebody offering you a title song or the end credit crawl or 2 songs to put into this movie. Right. And he said, that would be your existence going forward. Or you can write your own movie and put all your own songs into your movie. And I thought, what a crazy idea is that? But that it also made perfect sense. I'd never written a movie before, but what was to stop me from doing that? And so basically I put myself through an educational arc. I went to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences library, and I took down books, scripts, screenplays that I knew the movie of, and I read them because I wanted to see on paper what was on paper looked like what I saw on the screen.
Right.
And then I would do that in the mornings, and then I would go home and I would write in the afternoons. And eventually, it took me 3.5 years to get the movie made. I wrote 22 drafts of it. It went from 20th Century Fox to Paramount, one set of executives at 20th, another set of executives at Paramount, who then left and were replaced by another set of executives. Our original director at Paramount left and was replaced by a director who was then fired, and the first director came back again. So I was getting knocked from one side to the other. I was having every conceivable Hollywood high and low. In the course of this, I was swimming with the sharks. And at the end of 22 drafts, we were able to produce the movie that exists now. But there was no guarantee along the way that it was going to work out.
Yeah, the process, like you said, is a lot different from songwriting because you're doing research. It's writing is not foreign to you because writing is writing, but it's a different type of writing, right? I mean, it's
also writing. But when you write for the camera, you're not writing narrative. Right. You're writing for the camera, and so you're writing. You're having to imagine, how will this look? Where's the camera? Who is going to be featured? Who is this about? How is this going to be filmed? And you have to translate that to interior school classroom day action, and then the dialogue that goes with it. And so it's a different way of organizing your reality.
Right. But your work extended more than that, didn't you? For prep, didn't you go to the town in was it Oklahoma where
it was. This had come about. We have to tell that story because
of course.
when Craig planted that bug in my ear, and I began to think about maybe getting out there and writing a screenplay, what helped shape my idea of what I wanted to do was I took a lot of meetings following the Academy Award, and I was meeting with a lot of executives at a lot of studios, and they all were pitching me their ideas of the next musical I should do. And basically what they were saying is, okay, here's your next movie. All right. It's got to be a guy or a gal in New York, Los Angeles, or Nashville. And they want to be a Broadway star, a country star, or a rock star. And they are going to be in rehearsal for a Broadway show. They're going to be making an album, or they're going to be singing in clubs. And there's your soundtrack. There's your soundtrack right there. And I would listen to them pitch me these music where music was totally expected kind of scenarios. And I would leave there having come from Broadway, where, Broadway shows people burst into song like Hamilton, where they may, it's totally unexpected. And I left these meetings thinking, I want to write something where music is not expected. I don't want to put my actors in a studio or on a Broadway stage or with a guitar around their neck. And so instead, I held in the back of my head, where would music be unexpected? And I saw in the paper one day a little tiny item about a small town, Elmore City, Oklahoma, that had, after 88 years, the town council had repealed a ban on public dancing in the town of Elmore City. And the graduating senior class from Elmore City High School, numbering 14 students,
Wow.
had their first prom in 88 years. And I thought, whoa, a little town where you cannot dance and you haven't been able to dance for 88 years, that in that setting, music would be unexpected. And that's got to be where I set it. So I flew to Oklahoma and I went to Elmore City, and I spent 5 nights in Elmore City, going to the school, going to church meetings, talking to merchants along Main Street, going to the drive-in after school. Now, by this time, I was 29, 30. I wasn't too much older than the kids in school. So it wasn't like somebody with gray hair and
Right.
a cane was showing up. I was going and sitting in the back of classrooms, and I was talking to them, getting them to open up to me. And when I wrote my first draft of it was when I came back from Elmore City.
Didn't Kevin Bacon do something similar for his part? Not for the writing, obviously, but didn't Kevin like he was like 20, 23, 24?
Yeah.
He kind of slides in with the population a little bit, right?
He did. He actually went to the high school where we were. We eventually used it as the set. It's called Payson, the little town of Payson in Utah, not Oklahoma now.
Right.
In Payson, Utah.
Right.
He posed as a student for, I think, a day or two. And then the funny thing is, there was a bully who bullied him, and because he was the new guy.
Right.
And then within a couple of days, it was revealed that a movie was being shot. They were going to be holding open auditions for the students at that high school because they needed students to fill the hallways. So these kids whose school year was just winding down, they could get like the ultimate summer job as being extras in this Hollywood movie. And so, yes, so they shot this movie at Payson High School, and a lovely thing happened last year, 2024. Payson High School was being decommissioned. It was going to be torn down. It was a relic of the 60s, I think. And the building was old, and a new high school was being built to take its place. And so Payson High School was being demolished. And everybody was like, oh no, it's a temple to Footloose. And so the students in that high school actually began an online campaign called Bacon to Payson. And what they did was they were trying with a barrage of TikToks to lure Kevin Bacon into coming back to Payson for the last prom that they would have at that high school, as opposed to the first prom that those kids in Footloose have. This was going to be the last prom. And they shot like their own versions of movie scenes where somebody played the minister and somebody played the high school principal and somebody played Ren's part and Kevin Bacon's part. And they posted all these little videos throughout the year. They put the entire student body out in the parking lot and they did the Footloose dance at the end of the movie. And by the time they had gotten through their fall semester and their spring semester, they had worn Kevin Bacon down to the point that he went, okay, guys, I'll be there. And he flew in to Payson, Utah, and met with the graduating class, the last class to ever be at that high school. It was a wonderful full circle moment on the occasion, of the 40th anniversary of the motion picture.
Wow, what a sweet man. Talk about, Dean, your rapport with Kevin. It seems like it's so solid, and you guys seem like you think the world of each other, have the utmost respect for each other. I mean, that's the way it seems from the outside.
Well, the funny thing is, I did not work with him much at the time.
Right.
Because he was cast. I had written the movie. They went off to Utah and they shot the movie. I actually went up there thinking I was going to get to know the cast. I was going to hang out. We'd have dinners together. And the first day that I was there, I was summoned to the producer's office. They sat me down and they said, we need to cut 11 pages from the script. Yeah, there's a computer, IBM Selectric typewriter has been delivered to your motel room, and there's a sheet of paper up there, and scissors and tape go up there and cut 11 pages from the script because we're over budget. And so basically, I was locked into my motel room to bring the script down and the costs down. I ended up cutting 15 pages. And by that time, that's all that they needed me for. And they said, okay, we're not going to pay another night's stay at the motel. A car will be picking you up in 45 minutes, and we're going to take you back to LA. And so I saw Kevin a little bit like at the premiere and things like that. And the funny thing is, we would run into each other at airports. We would run into each other at the lounge at American Airlines, sometimes at LAX and sometimes at JFK. But we sort of put together a very nice 40-year relationship, popping in. And how are the kids? And how's it going? And what are you up to next? And I saw your last movie. And how's Kira?
That's, oh my gosh. And you are a big part of that movie. Your songwriting, your script, like that's amazing to me. Like for anybody that knows anything about this movie, knows that you had an immense role in this thing being produced and its popularity. I don't want you to agree because I don't want to make you sound arrogant, but like, I mean, it's a fact.
You're reminding me though of something that I had not thought of in a very long time. And that was, there was one night in the short time that I was there when it was going to be possible for me to join Kevin and Laurie Singer and Chris Penn and a couple of people. Kevin had a wardrobe fitting. And he had earlier in the day, I don't know where we had crossed paths, but he'd given me a cassette because even then he and his brother were playing and writing songs.
Right.
And he said, would you listen to some of the stuff I've done with my brother? And I did. I sat and I listened to it and I scribbled some notes. And I remember that when we had that dinner that evening, I gave him off the top of my head with only a couple of hours thinking about it, my off the cuff impressions of what he had done and what a good direction they were heading in and what I thought they might look at a second time. And he nodded and he took all that in. And he told me later that he he said something about the fact that he didn't expect that I would give him thoughts as in the depth that I had.
Right.
And he felt that he had been heard. And I didn't think much of a songwriter had given me songs and I had responded as honestly as I could. I didn't recognize at the time, I had not much in the way of credentials behind me. And so I was very moved that my saying what I said, whatever it was I said, made an impact.
You know, Dean, it's very similar to what you said at the beginning of the interview, where those two people at Yale heard you, like you felt you had been heard. What
Right.
is similar? What is similar? I
Yeah.
mean, granted, two different time periods and situations, but same basic principle, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Wow.
true.
Um, I miss Chris Penn. I have to say, I've been rewatching this on a loop. I always rewatch Footloose, but like I really miss him. I don't know, you know. Whatever you wanted to say.
No, he was a lovely spirit. It was what was interesting is that that was not the part as I wrote it at all.
Yeah.
I wrote a much more vanilla kind of best friend who was like sort of a version of Ren, not realizing that I had sort of like rubber stamped Ren. It was bland.
Right.
And our casting director, who is to this day a very dear friend, the casting director, who was a young woman who had just come off casting E.T., and she was casting Footloose, and she had an idea. And Chris Penn was an unproven editor. You know, he was sort of known within the Hollywood community, but the casting community,
Right.
but he didn't have much in the way of credentials. And she said to our director, Herbert Ross, I did not know that this had gone on because I was not in those meetings. I was not in casting meetings. She said to Herb Ross, I have somebody I think you should meet for the role of Willard. It was not called Willard at the time. It had a different name. And he had a different name. And she said, just go with me on this. She brought Chris Penn in, who sort of was like, he brought the whole circus with him. He was just who he was. He was sort of a little bit off center and really lovable, and a little bit like you could see that he'd have a chip on his shoulder and he'd be quick to put up his dukes. And he came in. Herbert had him read a couple of lines, a couple of scenes, I think, and then he sent for me. Then Herbert sent for me. We were at different ends of the production offices. And he sent for me, and he wanted me to meet Willard, Chris Penn. And Chris Penn read a couple of lines. And when the audition was over, we said, thank you very much. We sent him on his way. And Herbert said, he's our Willard. We have to. Now, your work is to go and rewrite the role for that boy. Write for that voice. And it was a fabulous assignment, because I just heard him talk and I knew what I could give him to say and how I could use him. And suddenly he was like chalk and cheese. Kevin Bacon and Chris Penn, oil and water. They were just a fabulous counterpoint to each other.
Yeah. Does Jane Feinberg give you the opportunity to take your input on other casting?
Does who?
Was the casting director Jane Feinberg? Do I have the right person?
No. It was Marcy Liroff.
Marcy Liroff, the other
Marcy
one.
Liroff.
I had a 50-50 shot.
Yeah.
Does Marcy seek your input for other casting choices? Is it
No, because to be honest, the hierarchy in pre-production with any
Right.
movie is
Right.
there's the director at the top, and the casting director is only answerable to him, and you shouldn't be asking other people's opinions, nor should they be bringing other people's suggestions. It's a sacred contract that a casting director and a director have.
Yeah.
And she had already done that with Steven Spielberg on E.T. She had already done Raiders of the Lost Ark. She had done Ridley Scott on Blade Runner.
Oh,
She
that's
was
right.
she was very, very disciplined and very, and she was coming in at one end of the production offices and leaving from there. I wasn't crossing paths with her.
Right. No, because I figure because you wrote that, you're the screenwriter. There are times where, just as a collaborative unit, people ask questions. Let me ask this another way. Is there a casting choice you were particularly fond of or happy with, where you're like, wow, this one in particular, not that you were unhappy with the rest, but is there one in particular, Dean, where you're like, that's that character. That's it.
It was, Marcy did exactly the same thing that I described with Chris Penn.
Yeah.
She said to Herbert, she said, I have an actor in mind, and I'm not going to bring anybody else in until you see this actor. And if you feel that I need to go farther afield, I will. But please meet John Lithgow for The Minister.
Oh,
And he came in, and Herbert cast him in the room. That's unheard of. Herbert told him in the room he had the role. That was how spot on she was. And I mean, I was a little familiar with her. John Lithgow had been on Broadway while I was on Broadway. While I was doing Pippin, he was in a show called The Changing Room. And then he had come and done a couple of movies. He had done The World According to Garp. And he was a fantastic character actor who was making his way in the world. And to be honest, I had written the part of the minister thinking it would be maybe a younger version of Paul Newman.
Right.
Kind of a leading man in his own way. What she brought with John Lithgow was great strength, incredible core of energy, but highly, very, very sympathetic.
Right.
Very sympathetic. Because at first I had written a minister that I thought was laying down the law and shouting from his pulpit at these people and bringing them into line. And then here comes John Lithgow, who leads with love. And it completely and utterly took the same words that I had written and turned them around on me. That was a breathtaking choice.
Yeah, I agree. I was really surprised when I read how close Rob Lowe was to Kevin Bacon's role. I really did not anticipate that.
Well, it's a funny story, and I can tell you this story because Rob lives up here in Santa Barbara.
Oh, wow.
We have run into each other and when we were in Hollywood, we'd occasionally cross paths because his manager was a friend of mine, and I would be at his birthday party, or he was dating, I'm going to forget her name, but I would be invited to parties of that ilk of Hollywood, and he's gotten a lot of mileage out of the fact that he had this audition for Footloose, and he was killing it. But he was also in an audition with a bunch of other,
Gotcha.
It was sort of Brat Pack time. Emilio Estevez, Charlie Sheen, Judd Hirsch. Those are the people who all came in for all the same movies, whether it was St. Elmo's Fire or Pretty in Pink. And he was in a dance callback. And Rob Lowe had dance background. He had gotten some training along the way. And he tells this story. He told me eventually, when we finally got to be good enough friends, he told me that he had learned the combination, and he had a moment where he said, oh, I see what they're doing. And each guy was called upon to dance their own, and they were watching each other dance. And Rob was thinking, oh, they're not prepared for what I'm going to do. And he got out there, and he apparently did some unexpected move that was not choreographed, and he blew out his knee. He dislocated his knee.
Oh my God. Yeah.
He fell to the ground in pain. An ambulance was called. We are at the other end of the Paramount lot, and they're on a sound stage auditioning at another end of the Paramount lot. And all we get is word that an ambulance has been called to the dance callbacks. And there's an ambulance taking an actor away. Oh, it's Rob Lowe is being taken away by the ambulance. I can't honestly say, because I was not there and I was not privy to the order in which everybody was being ranked, but nobody in that room was really a contender. We went to New York to find Kevin Bacon. We sort of scoured Hollywood, and then we went to New York, and that's where we found Kevin Bacon. And so Rob was certainly, he made it through the reading callbacks and the first meeting, and then the readings and the chemistry callbacks. But in the dance audition, he blew out his knee, and he and a bunch of other people were all dancing for that role at the time. There was also a very, very real interest in Tom Cruise. And because Tom Cruise was busy on some movie, he was on a movie that was called All the Right Moves, and
Yes.
could not get to us to audition. And so we were allowed to go into the editing room where the movie of Risky Business was being edited. And we stood around the cutting machine, the cutting table, and the editor played us the rock and roll, his dance,
Yeah.
with the microphone and on the couch.
Yeah.
We saw Kevin Bacon just cut it up like crazy, and we all thought maybe he is the answer. Maybe he's going to be our guy. And so Herbert Ross arranged to meet privately, the director arranged to meet privately have a one-on-one meeting with Tom Cruise. That was the respect that he was according him. But he had not been prepared for the fact that in preparation for his role as a high school football player in All the Right Moves, Tom had bulked up and he put on
Oh,
15 some odd pounds of muscle so that he could be believable as a
right.
football player.
Right.
What Herbert Ross was acutely aware of, because Herbert came from the world of ballet. He was also himself a choreographer. He also he did Turning Point. He made the movie Turning Point. He was used to filming dancers, and he knew what he needed to see in the room. He needed the line, the carriage, the shape of the body in order for it to translate to film. He was very adamant about that. And suddenly, Tom Cruise is not tall and lean like he presents in Risky Business. He's more like a football player. And Herbert didn't think that he could make him look on film the way that he needed for Ren to look.
Right.
You know, you go back and look at the footage of Kevin Bacon standing in front of that yellow bug with the headlights on, and the pictures of his legs in those jeans in front of the glare of the light bulbs, and the way that he's moving, and his line is perfect. I mean, he looks like he's 11 feet tall. Those legs are so long, and he always was very lean.
Right.
But he looked incredibly tall because of it. And Herbert knew how to film that and get that on film. And that was what he didn't think he'd be able to get in time from Tom Cruise.
Yeah. Dean, I heard or read something where they didn't think that Kevin was quote unquote sexy or hot enough or could carry a movie of this magnitude. Any truth to those rumors, or am I just making things up? I thought I read that.
Yeah. Our executive, the senior vice president at Paramount, who was in charge of our project, was a woman who was a good friend of mine with a potty mouth on her. And she, I don't know if you swear on
You could swear, Dean. You could swear.
So when Kevin was found in New York, it was decided, and the casting director there sent some tapes,
Yeah.
a tape of his auditions, and it was decided that he was sufficiently interesting that Herbert Ross was going to fly east and direct him in a screen test. They needed to get him really directed and in a screen test and make the best possible case for him. And so nobody at Paramount had seen Kevin Bacon up to that point. Herbert flies off to New York. My friend Craig Zaden, who advised me to write the movie in the first place, ends up as the producer on the movie. He flies to New York, and the first thing that he does when he gets in 2 days before the screen test is he puts Kevin Bacon together with the chicest barber on the scene, the chicest male haircutter at the time, because he wanted something to be done to Kevin's hair that would be very distinctive. And he goes in there, chop, and he comes up with that flare of hair that was not Kevin's doing. It was done 24 hours before this screen test. Herbert goes in, loves the hair, directs Kevin, films it, makes him look terrific. They fly the film back out to California. They have a screening with the executives from Paramount, and the woman executive is in the room with the other people, and they show the screen test, which only lasts a minute and a half, and the lights come back up, and she says, "I don't know, I wouldn't fuck him." And Herbert said something to the effect that he said, "Well, so fortunately, you don't have to." And the head of the studio at the time, Barry Diller, said to Herbert, this is what he said to Herbert. He said, "What's the budget of this thing?" And at the time, it was like $8 million. And Barry basically said, "Just do it, just do it." And realized that it was such a toss away for them. It was a throwaway. They were making the Star Trek movies. They were making Mission Impossible movies. They were doing all the Indiana Jones movie. So this was like, please, this is for kids. Who's going to see this movie? It'll be the second feature at a drive-in. Go make it. Don't bother us anymore with this. And so we cast Kevin Bacon. We kind of like flew below the radar. We cast Kevin Bacon.
Dean, thank you for all this time. I have two final questions for you. The first of which, right, this is the perfect 80s movie, right? Actors, story, dancing. When I say amazing soundtrack, I mean maybe the best of all time to any movie. Like there's just, like you said, they don't make them like this anymore. Like they're not enjoyable like this anymore. They're not reflective of a time period. I mean, this is a movie that, I mean, this movie not only reflects the 80s, or it reflects the time before that when you did your research at some of those schools and what they couldn't do. And I don't know, I just feel like this is one of those movies that we might not see it again. We might not see something like this ever again.
I'll tell you how that happened. Nobody knew what we were doing. Nobody cared really what we were doing. Our production offices were not in the studio buildings. We were in a double-wide trailer parked in the parking lot at Paramount Studios. They thought of this as something that they would probably make a little bit of money off, and then they would write it off. And as a consequence, nobody interfered with us. We were casting lots of kids whom nobody had heard of. John Lithgow was not known. Diane Wiest was not known. They would eventually all go on to these amazing careers, but we got away with things. And I wrote all those songs with all those different collaborators and recorded them with all those different artists without ever anybody in the executive suite saying, "What are you doing? What's going on? I want to come to the recording studio. I want to be there when they cut the vocal on this or that or the other thing." What was happening while we were making this movie, simultaneously, what was happening? MTV was getting into every cable outlet in the nation. It had benefited, the movie that preceded us by a year, Flashdance, had benefited from the presence of MTV, but it was just beginning. And in the course of the next year, MTV exploded and filled every nook and cranny in the United States, so that by the time Footloose arrived, there was a station on television that we could play our songs on with the footage to go with it. And I didn't know it was coming. Nobody knew it was coming, but all of a sudden there was this, we caught lightning in a bottle. We arrived at the moment that MTV arrived, the both spontaneous combustion. And then as a result, after that, studio executives at film studios who never, ever cared about the rosters of recording labels, suddenly they wanted their hands all over what's the next project and who are you going out to and who's going to record this song and have we got enough big names on this soundtrack. And we snuck through under the radar. We got all the people that we wanted, and they sang the songs that we wanted them to sing, and nobody interfered with us. And then it went, and from that point on, the game changed. Yeah. And I never again had that kind of unfettered experience.
You know, Dean, it's like 24/7 movie promotion, right? MTV blows up, and this is a movie about music and dancing and kids and
Yeah.
teenagers. It is the definition of what MTV was at the time, right?
Yeah.
You know?
As a matter of fact, the video of Footloose, which was the scene of Kevin dancing in the warehouse,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that had gone on MTV about 5 weeks before the movie was coming. And they were still doing audience testing because they were getting really great numbers. And Paramount was starting to think, we may have something here. Let's test it in this place, and this place, and this place. And there were a couple of times in New York where they screened it supposedly at an out of the way cinema, and Kevin Bacon went to the screening
Wow.
and was recognized. And it was like One Direction was in the house because he was on MTV. Footloose had not happened yet, but he was on MTV. And that was when the people at Paramount started thinking, oh, we might have something here.
Wow. Wow. I read where Kevin, if he's at a wedding or a celebration, will tip the DJ. Please don't play Footloose,
Please don't say-
because Dean, that's so exhausting, right? Can you imagine every function he goes to, people want him to dance, want him to. That's That's exhausting, you know. And from clearly everything you've said and everything we know about him, he's clearly a wonderful, giving man, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's like, come on, enough is enough. I will end with this. What was your take on the 2011 remake?
You know, I was very happy with it, to be honest. There were a number of attempts on the way to remake it, and there were a number of directors who came in and they had ideas about how they would change it and how they would change it up to make it more relevant. And when it ended up with Craig Brewer directing it,
Director, yep.
Craig Brewer was an incredible fan of the original movie. He worshiped the original movie, and he made it clear to the producers that he wanted to respect the original movie, but he wanted to make it his own to whatever extent he could. And I know that I think he kept 6 of our songs and put a couple of others in. But when he was hired and they were about to start pre-production with him, he asked to have lunch with me. And I met him for lunch. I liked him enormously. I just liked this guy enormously. And I brought him as a present in a box. I brought him the one copy I still had of the 45 of Footloose and gave that to him as a go, have a wonderful time making this movie.
Oh my
And
God.
I got home after that lunch. And again, my friend Craig Zaden, who produced the first movie, ended up as a producer of the remake. And Craig Brewer called and told me at lunch, he said, I want you to be involved. I hope you'll come to the set. I hope I can call you with ideas. I hope you'll look at the dailies and all this stuff. And I got home and Craig called me and said, wow, Craig Brewer loves you and he wants you thoroughly involved. And I said, I don't want to be anywhere near this movie because I made this movie 30 years ago. I made the Broadway musical out of this material.
Right.
And I don't want to be around a set with a director who I have great faith in, who I don't want anybody to be looking to me for how am I doing? What do you think about that? I want them to be unfettered. I said, don't let him call me with any ideas. Don't send me any footage. Keep me as far away as possible from this production. I want to be surprised along with the world. And I was. And I thought that he did a wonderful job of translating it. The only one thing that I didn't realize Herb Ross had done in the beginning, which was really, he cast non-dancers and in a movie about not being able to dance.
Right.
And then when they do their final dance, it's kind of wonderful that they manage to get through. Like when Chris Penn does his final dance, it's just joyous.
It is.
When Craig Brewer was he arrived to find that the role of Ariel had already been cast because the studio executives at Paramount had decided that Julianne Hough, who was a big star on Dancing with the Stars, should be the perfect. Well, when you do that, and then they cast Kenny Wormald, who's a wonderful dancer, as Ren, and they make a big deal of his dance pedigree, the element of surprise is gone. They have one of the world's best dancers dancing as playing the minister's daughter. There's no surprise, no guessing how well she's going to do the finale and how well he's going to do the finale. And I didn't realize just how canny Herbert had been in casting non-dancers who struggled to dance.
Oh, that's such a great point. That's such a great point, Dean. Dean, as a representative of Generation X, I want to say how grateful we are of your work. Writing songs, your writing in Footloose, just everything you've done. I'm so grateful personally that you've given me so much of your time to come on and talk about your amazing life. And it is so greatly appreciated. And you are a grade A human being. And thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Derek.